da 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 da. My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. Do a little bit of
Now this is, how many of you have listened to the show before?
everything.
Anyone? Okay, a few, that's good. It's meant to be like a conversation. All my podcasts are pretty much conversation flow. Interactive. At the end, we wanted to save time to ask questions. You guys ask questions to this group. And so be thinking about that. But also, you can laugh, you can participate, you can be loud, right? Like it's part of the process. Is everyone cool? I was really hoping there would be this, in the front, there'd be some actual people, but that's fine. It's in the back, like the church. We're going to get going and talk about payers. And following the last one, I'm trying to be positive, but because that guy said, I know you guys missed it, but what was the guy's before us? What was his name? John. John was he was very like, hey, you got to be positive. Like leaders are always positive, right? So, but I think with this subject, it's hard, right? We all deal with kind of. I always say that we all together are sharing stuff because we have a common enemy, and I think in this case, it might be the payers. But I think people live in three camps, and I've been thinking a lot about this. I think on the provider side, people live in three camps. There's a camp of, and my friend Sarah Armstrong would say that she's like a believer that we can fix the relationships with payers and that we can work together, right? So there's the believers. I think there's probably a camp of most people that are skeptics of like, at times, some payers can be good to us and probably trying to do the right thing. But there's another camp of a few people that I know that are just angry. They're like, no way, I don't believe these people at all. They're like the devil, basically, right? So I think there's three, but there's no doubt, if you heard Shannon's talk yesterday, Shannon, and I can corroborate this data, is that we're seeing initial denials increase around 26%, mostly in the clinical side. And so that is absolutely happening. And we know for a fact that payers are spending a lot of time on automation AI, and they're not doing that to reduce cost. They're doing that to increase efficiency, but increase the amount of claims they're going through. And we know that for a fact, like tripling down on that. I've seen lots of examples of that happening. So you guys have kind of three very different perspectives. I would say, let's just kick it off and maybe talk a little bit about some bad behavior we're seeing. I don't know, Ryan, if you want to kick us off, because you're the lawyer, you see a fair amount. But
yeah, I do. I guess I'm probably work for the people in the third camp that you discussed as the mercenary that is sent out to.
Oh, you're like the hired gun. Yeah.
The hired gun, so to speak. What I've seen, I've been doing it now for 13 years. My first 3 years, I actually worked for the insurance companies defending the denials. In the last 10 years, working on the provider side.
You were on the other side.
I was for a while.
What was your observations from that side?
So I think when you deal like with the lower levels, just the people who are going through the claims, and have just kind of a checklist of, is there coverage and are we primary? They just go through a checklist, and it's not really true believers at that level. They just
It's a system.
It's a system that they go through, and so when they put a denial in place and a provider wants to be paid, they call us and say, defend our denial. There's kind of an old saying in that world of delay, deny, defend. And being on the side I am now, the delay is the big piece that I focus on because, and maybe this is kind of a cynical way to view it, but insurance companies, a lot of them, not all of them, are just big banks. So when you look at it from that perspective, the longer they hold the premiums to invest, if it costs them money to defend their denials, as long as they make money on the spread, so to speak, that's really the perspective. So it depends how you go up the chain, but and we can even talk more about when you go up the chain, they look for other reasons to deny claims, and how they defend those from a legal perspective gets real complex at times, so to speak.
Because really they're trying to do holding costs of, like, if I hold my money longer, I'll collect more interest, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other piece of it is there is a statistics probably out there, I don't know the exact number, of how many people or providers that will walk away, right? When you have, there was an old saying, I think it was in a court opinion, the only thing worse than having no insurance is too much insurance, because then they start pointing the finger at each other in the hopes of, hey, the provider will take payment from somebody and write off the rest of it and move on because you've got a lot of claims you have to get through.
You're just pointing the finger at,
yeah.
You really should pay this.
Yes. So I find myself in a lot of those fights where you have too much insurance on a patient, and you end up in court with 2 or 3 insurance companies all pointing the finger at each other. And to be honest with you, part of what we have to convince the judge is, why is the provider holding the bag when I've got these 2 people over here that somebody owes a claim, but the provider's just sitting waiting for them to sort it out, because it will never get sorted out.
But either way, they've stalled.
Yes, it is the delay, deny, defend is a theme that I see quite often.
And how long is those typically taking? Like, what's the...
I've seen go as long as, 6 months I would say would be really, really, really short, all the way up to a couple years. And another thing we always advise our clients on is, speed. And I know it's difficult in today's kind of manpower world, but speed, getting ahead of it sooner rather than later, produces payment, I think, in my experience. So it's kind of being out ahead, understanding if you have to send an appeal letter, don't just send them the stuff you sent before, but setting that up and doing it in a timely manner, and keep pinging the payor can usually get to a resolution before, we have to get involved, so to speak. But speed, I think, but a process that's organized, a process that is timely really helps.
The way the system is set up, it's on the providers currently to figure that out and to prioritize. As you said, I've got so many denials coming in now, right? We've got to ramp up in the initial denial. So I've got so many coming in. I have to figure out, how am I going to prioritize which ones I'm going to tackle? Am I going to put them in buckets and tackle them that way? Am I going to only tackle the ones above a certain dollar amount? In which case I'm going to leave a lot of money on the table, but I may not have the manpower to appeal every single denial that comes our way. And they use really vague denial reasons, and they might use the same denial reason for a couple of different things. So I have a really recent example of this. In the therapy world, in the Part B space, for Medicare and managed payers, we have to use modifiers sometimes on the lines that we bill or the codes that we bill to say that these services didn't happen at the same time. They were separate and distinct. And that's because of a Medicare rule, National Correct Coding Initiative. A lot of people are probably familiar with it. But anyway, the point is that the managed care side, those payers decide how they're going to apply those rules, and they don't apply them unilaterally or across the board or the same way that Medicare does. And so they're often looking to us to send in documentation for every single claim that contains one of these modifiers to essentially prove that we have provided distinct and separate services, as opposed to what Medicare does, which is pay us because we have coded properly and we've done the right thing, and every once in a while come in and say, hey, let me look at the documentation for this claim or this claim. A couple of the payers in the managed care space are currently requesting documentation on every single claim that contains those modifiers.
That's Medicare Advantage?
Yes.
I'm just guessing.
It is Medicare Advantage. What a good guess.
Jeez.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, from a provider perspective, right, the burden of proof is on us. We have to then send in that documentation. But the denial reason that they use is often something like non-covered service.
Right. very
Well, it's actually not
nebulous.
It's
like-
actually not a non-covered service. It's a covered service under certain conditions. But
you're,
yeah,
and you're all across the country. You're not like just like in
Correct.
one state. You're everywhere.
Yeah, my company's in 46 out of 50 states. I mean, we're huge. Yes, everywhere. This
And
is
your
not just
average
in
claim size is what, like?
I mean, from a Medicare perspective, you could be looking at anywhere from $200 to $1,000 for a month of service, potentially. But they're looking
So
at
the volume of
right?
so they're asking for medical records
Yes.
on $1,000.
Yes, on every single one of those, every single one that
Ryan,
goes in.
thoughts?
Well,
From a legal
that's part of
perspective, is there
it
anything
is
to do?
they know that I'm sure they have analytics that say they will not get a response or a sufficient response on X percentage of these, and it's only $1,000 here, because it does put the provider in the position of, do I waste man hours trying to get my $1,000? But if you start seeing the same things over and over and over, you aggregate those, you're talking millions upon millions
Sure.
of dollars. And that's where they use the technology to find a coding issue. And I've seen it also, funny you talk about small amounts, I've seen the reverse, where they will pay the physician charges because they're not very large, but then the HB or the facility charge is large and it doesn't get paid. And I've been in
Right.
situations where I've been in depositions and you ask one person, why didn't it get paid? Well, it need to go approval up higher because of the amount. And you keep going up and up. And instead of admitting that they have an algorithm that says, above this threshold, we are going to deny it, they just say, well, it was a system error.
100,000 above, system error.
System error. Which, I don't know what that means. What is a system error when you are a $5 billion company? Like, how does your system have errors? But like I said, the cynical view is something is going on. But I do believe exactly what Amy described, that it is just they know certain providers are going to walk away and they're going to retain the money.
The good news, though, is that if you do respond appropriately, you have a really good chance of getting paid. It's a delay, but it actually happens. The problem is, again, as a provider, you have to be organized enough to have an approach to each one of those vague denial reasons and the ability to figure out, why is this one denied?
And even after all of that, you've been paid and you fought for the money, they come to take it back. And that, to me, is criminal. And I wear a white hat, as you know, for everything. And when I first learned of this practice, RAC audits, private payer audits, take-backs, I didn't believe it. And I'm not really a healthcare guy, more a business person who invests in things, and I look at technology, how can it help people? And to me, like, we had a very large university health system contact us and say, all right, it was Medicare, and they were very small, and so they'd get RAC audits on them. And so, like, 3 years ago, they lost $1 million. 2 years ago, they lost $1.4 million. And a year ago, they lost $2 million because they started increasing it because they were just taking money. And they said, we're batting 67% when we respond to these things, but we don't have the people to do this. So they use technology, right, to respond to these things, to make their people more efficient, but also to grab records using technology to go into Epic, pull, organize, so that responses could be made easy. And actually, you know I listen to all your podcasts because I grade them. I grade all these podcasts.
I only get one person that sends me a text after every show with a grade and a review, and it's you.
Thanks again for my 4th podcast, and I've gotten all A+.
It's just you grade your own.
Right.
It's
I
nice.
don't
That's
grade
nice
my
of
own.
you. Yeah.
I don't grade my own. But there's been 2 people recently, providers, who said, oh, by the way, we're dealing with all this, and now they're taking it back. Right? You've had 2 recently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Of
So
course, it's an issue.
yeah.
The thing about the takebacks is interesting, and Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on it because I've never had a legal thought. But the way they do that typically is they'll just subtract money from a current payment, and it could be 2 years ago, right? And there's, to me, that actually is there any legal like, is there a legal road there to prevent them from doing that? Because it's different if I'm like, they send me an invoice, which I can then delay, right? Just do the same thing they're doing to me. But instead what they do is they just take it right from your payments.
So yeah, so what we do see a lot and is, you know, they'll batch pay, right? And then at the end of it say, okay, we owe you.
It's one big remittance.
Yeah, we owe you $5 million, but oh, by the way, we're going to take back 55,000 or 500,000, whatever the case may be. And the reason they can do that is because of their contracts with the providers allow this clawback. It's a little different than a RAC audit, but it allows like the clawback, and especially, as I'm sure people are familiar, you see this consolidation of kind of the big 5 health insurers. And so that gives them leverage over providers. I think you can read articles on UHC was trying to make people come into their network by, you know, not paying out-of-network claims. So it gives them great leverage when it comes to contracting.
So it's in the contract itself we would have to fix.
Usually, yep. You would have to look at your contracts, but at the same time, we've always told our clients, and we've gotten involved, where the contract is your avenue to take out a hammer and hit them over the head and drag them into court and say, no, you don't get to just take back what you think is the right amount to take back. And you have to push to the point where you're ready to do that from an investment standpoint. So what we have tried to do is, it's a lot of administrative burden when you get to that point. And we understand that, and so that it's not only a money issue, but it's just a manpower issue. And so we have made moves, my group has, to alleviate that administrative burden by upgrading our technology, so that we're saying, look, if you have these claims that you want taken care of by us, we'll take on the administrative burden with technology and being able to go into their systems and grab what we need. Because that's kind of the biggest issue from a legal side. Once we get into litigation, we do need some support, but, you know, calling people into depositions or calling people and say, hey, I need this specific record or that, it can get cumbersome for providers. So we've tried to upgrade our technology to avoid that and make things smoother for them. Like, it kind of goes back to what I said originally. With all of this, being ahead of the game with a process, it's in the military they have an old saying that says slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And so when you have a process that is methodical, and I know it can be difficult times, but it ends up to a faster payment or faster resolution, so to speak, even when you get to our level.
Or
Because Amy's saying, she's organized.
Yeah, and I mean, we all know the saying, the best defense is a good offense, right? It's been attributed to Bill Belichick and George Washington. I'm not sure which one is true, but.
are you from New England?
Go Patriots. But anyway.
Wah, wah.
Remember there.
But anyway, that really is the key to all of it. You know, again, I'm lucky enough to work for a provider that has a team that does this, right? So we have a group of people who are experts, who understand, who look at claims all day, who look at documentation all day, and know what we're looking at and how to work within it and how to create, you know, a template letter in order to make appealing this whole batch of claims work much faster. And we've also begun to leverage technology to help us because, as you said, we've got more work to do and the same amount of people to do it, because what we find is that the payers see someone else doing something well, like, for example, our friends who are, you know, denying for that particular modifier issue that I was talking about. It starts with one, and then I swear it's like they have chats
they
like
get
this,
into a room, yeah,
right?
for
And
sure.
so, and then they're like, "Hey, do you know what we did? And it worked really well, right? It delayed us having to pay them for 6 months because, you know, the first appeal window is typically 120 days, right? So that's 4 months plus the 60-day response time. That's how long they can delay paying you when you were right the whole time. And what you did was exactly what was supposed to be done.
Right. I do have a theory that there's an arms race, right? That the irony of everything is that you're going to use automation to do your appeal letters. We're already starting to use AI to like figure out what to do and how to send it. But they're doing the same thing on their side.
Of course they are.
I have a friend who's got this company that does like a robot, uses like AI and a robot to do calls to get authorizations, right? It's incredible technology. If you've never heard, or you should check it out. But it's mostly on specialty pharmacy, right? And so you listen to the call, and it's like, and they make the voice sound like a robot, so they know they're actually talking to her, like it's not a real voice. But it's fascinating because it's like, at the end, the robot asks the woman on the phone, like, how would you rate the interaction today? No joke. And the person's like, honestly, this is the best call I had all day, right? But the funny thing is like, I'm like, the insurers are going to figure this out. They're going to do that. They're going to have a robot on the other side of theirs. And so eventually what we'll have is just two robots actually literally calling each other, talking to each other, right? Because they don't want to do the APIs for real, even though they say they're going to. And so I just find this fascinating of like this escalation. Like it's a game. It's a
and
shell
then
game.
who has all the money? I read a stat where United Health net profit was like the 20 top providers total. Their profits are going like this, your profits are going like this, and oh, by the way, I know you'll see me no matter what. So I guess I've never done a claim, but it irritates me.
Well, the change thing, even though in theory they're going to lose like $200 million in revenue,
okay,
it actually didn't affect their earnings,
It did
which
not.
is wild to think like on many levels. But
It's
that's
pure
probably
bullshit
another
is what it
subject.
is.
I did get my change help.
We can swear on the show. It's okay.
Oh, sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, my attorney, if you have any issues with me.
And now, a word from our sponsor. This episode of My Good Friends is brought to you today by our good friends at Switch RCM. Nate is back to tell us more about the complicated issue of out-of-state claims. Tell us, Nate.
As a provider, I know that it's very difficult to understand how to register and how to route out-of-state claims based on various rules. So Switch RCM has created technology that automates the process of getting the claim to the right payer, the highest paying payer, and the fastest reimbursement payer without putting any of the burden of that routing back on the provider.
It's amazing technology, and no one in the country is doing this, just like some of their other technologies. So folks, if you need this, which I'm assuming you do, let's reach out directly to Nate at switchrcm.com. He can help you and your team figure this complicated problem out. Thanks, Nate. Appreciate all your work on this.
Now, back to the show.
I would say the big ones where I've seen like I said, in depositions, and we start pushing at the lower levels, it's not that big of a deal. But we are dealing with one of the big ones right now on thousands upon thousands of claims for COVID testing at the time back when it first came out. And what is the correct amount to pay? And what was the contractual amount? What did the CARES Act, all that went in play? And where we found a pressure point was when you start asking, how did you process all these claims and decide these 200 were paid at this rate, but these other 200 were paid at another rate? It really starts getting, their lawyers start then throwing up the roadblocks, and that they start trying to block what we're trying to figure out, and it terrifies them because if you start really digging into data, I believe if we ever get to that point, you're going to find out that there is maybe some sort of algorithm that's being run based on different things that is just deciding what's going to be paid and what's not going to be paid based on different percentages and historical data. That's what I think. That might be once again a cynical look at things, but
It's easy to be a cynic. I mean, you look at the numbers, you talk to the people. I mean, it's hard not to be a cynic.
Yeah. What are some of the craziest things you've seen, Amy, Ryan?
Well, so Brian mentioned contracts, and really, again, from a provider perspective, right, that's on you to know what's in your contract. But again, to the Medicare Advantage payers, a lot of their contracts will be hiding a limitation in your rights to appeal. So,
What do you mean by that?
so for a Medicare Advantage patient, you should have the right to appeal the same way you do for a Medicare patient, because it's an administration of the Medicare program. So for Medicare, there's 5 levels of appeal. With a Medicare Advantage plan, as a provider, you may have signed a contract that said you accept 2 levels of appeal only. And so often, We will want to continue to appeal on behalf of our patient and our customer, and we are at a dead end because we've exhausted the appeal rights with Humana, for example.
And the second level of appeal goes to who?
It should go to a qualified independent contractor, which is not the person who took a look at it the first time. So typically your first level of appeal goes back to the payer, right? So they're the ones who already denied it. We do have a really good success rate with overturning at that level when you're right, but if it's something that could be seen as a little bit vague or gray, you have a much better chance typically going to that second level of appeal. With the Medicare Advantage, though, again, you're typically going back to the same provider for that second level, and again, you're at a dead end. You can, and we have had success with going to the CMS regional office for whatever area of the country you're in for that particular payer, and advocating for we deserve and have a right to continue to appeal this claim to higher levels. And we will do that when we passionately believe in it and have success, but you have to have the people to actually do that and to know the system and to understand that you have this opportunity and.
And you're working with volumes of low claims. Like you have to kind of decide whether or not you're going to go to that.
You have to prioritize. You have to prioritize.
You're almost doing it out of like pure spite. You got to like, I'm going to do this regardless.
I mean, they add up to a big number.
Yeah,
but you got to have enough volume. That's the problem.
Hey, Ben. Ben, we've got a audience member that's got a thought, comment on this. Can we jump in?
Yeah, of course.
Honestly,
Yes.
It's not just talk.
I have a thought on almost everything you've said. But the one thing about Medicare Advantage contracts that you need to know is you have more appeal rights if you are not contracted with the payer. You're absolutely right. When you're contracted with the payer, your appeal rights and appeal levels are dictated by your contract. But if you're not contracted, you have your appeal rights are governed by what the Medicare Managed Care Manual says. But what we have found too, and I always say payers are going to payer, and we have to deal with that. But we've actually had contracted payers starting to send us forms as if we're not a contracted payer, and I had to go, here's my contract. Why are you sending me these forms? And it's one of the largest, and maybe the largest, and you all can figure out who that is. I'm almost 3 months into this. Why are you sending me these forms? Conversation. I don't have an answer. And we're talking inpatient hospital claims that we're not getting paid for. And I feel your pain. The low claims, low dollar claims are very frustrating because you have to pick. What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. So
the large inpatient, I think, is when you get to a point, those are way easier for a provider to decide to fight because there's real money on the table. Going back to kind of some of the crazy, this was a while ago before I took a dep of an adjuster. We talked about how many claims he may have been handling at any one given time, and it was up to 150, and so there's a lot. So we're like, well, how do you start going through those? And he said, well, they stack up, and we're just like, okay, well, how often do you go through it? How do you come back? And he's like, well, when it gets to a certain number, I just clear my queue out and figure they'll rebill me. So,
what do you mean by clear the queue?
Yeah, they were just like, either he meant wipe, like they had a physical pile of paper on his desk or something. They just like, we'll start over, and who rebills me, we'll go going there. So it's kind of answers like that.
I believe that.
I enjoy those answers because it will never go to a trial. Because if it did, I think people sitting in a jury box will say like, well, we're just starting over. Like they're not going to accept that as something that's reasonable or rash. So yeah, you hear stuff like that, and like I said, the adjusters or the people at the lower levels doing the denials are just running through a checklist, and they don't have any. I would say over the last decade, it's kind of funny. I have no explanation why the people at that level were kind of true believers in defending their denials, and now when we get into depositions and whatnot with those people again these days, it just seems like I'm just trying to get through my day. I'm going by claim, and what happens, happens. And so there's apathy for it because I just don't think they have any pressure from anybody to really constantly keep up. And then even in litigation, nobody likes to be deposed. And so when we start deposing these types of people is usually when we end up getting our clients paid, most of the time.
Yeah, but you have to get to that stage.
You have to get to that stage.
Where Amy's doesn't have claims that are large enough. Like she'd have to have enough volume at one payer that's acting poorly.
Right, and you'd have to aggregate the claims, but if they're doing it that often, it gets with the same payer, it will add up real quick and whatnot. And going back to the contract, yeah, there's disadvantages to having a contract, but the contract is a for sure avenue to get you into court because now you have
it's a legal document to like hold them accountable to something.
Yeah.
What I think, and I don't know if Billie Jean's here, but like I'm talking a lot about Billie Jean who runs contracting for Mercy, and it's like that does seem to be over my time, my 20 plus years in RevCycle. A number of health systems have those things separated. Like RevCycle and they weren't always great relationships, and so it's like, but these guys are building the contract for you. I know that's not the case. Hopefully, the case with everywhere, but I know that's been a struggle because again, if you're them, you're undermanned. You're outmanned when you go to a negotiation. I hate to say it, but their whole business on the insurance side. If you look at like, I did this thing where it was like, what % do they spend, insurers spend on like admin, like actually doing the administrative claims? On their side, it's like 26%. On our side, we my cost to collect is 3%. And I know we're providers of care, right? But like, if you think about their whole business is trying to figure that out. Yes. We're like, up to 20 years ago, we were in the basement.
Sure.
Like now it's elevated and people, it's gotten elevated, but it's still low on the priority list.
Yeah, to your point, good communication among your team is huge, right? It's part of that best defense is a good offense. You've got to have those folks talking to each other, right? So again, in a large company like mine, we've got to have everybody, every piece of the cycle, every part, we have to be communicating with each other. One of the big things we find is that, and I'm sure everybody in this room has had this experience, payers like to change their prior authorization rules just on a dime, and just to keep us guessing, right? So someone's particular.
Oh, no, I'm sure it's valid. Like,
right,
yeah.
Right. Someone's particular plan that didn't require prior auth last month now requires prior auth this month. So you got paid last month, but you're not going to get paid this month because you don't have a prior auth. But you didn't need a prior auth when they started care.
I have a case right now where somebody came in with massive injuries, and their health insurer, the patient ended up passing away, I think 2 weeks, and the denial was, even after an appeal, no pre-auth for treatment. And we're talking close to $1 million in bills with catastrophic, the initial ER is catastrophic injuries. There was nobody was going to make a call, and so you have to deal with that. So we'll end up, this case is in the early stages, but it amazes me that I'm going to have to now dig into.
They'll end up paying.
Yes, they will end up paying.
But the reality is they stalled it long enough.
Somebody made the decision to say, well, we're not going to pay that because it requires a pre-auth, as the person was in a coma and then passed away after 14 days. And he had other insurance also, but so that I think that goes into play. But we'll find out. But that's the type of denial that we see that I wouldn't say we chuckle at, but we're just kind of like, unbelievable.
I got a buddy who started, this is interesting, he started a company this year that they figured out how to, because in most of these contracts, most of everyone's contracts, they have an interest penalty for delay for after a certain amount of time, there's an interest penalty. And some states actually have this as a law.
Yeah.
That if you don't pay within a certain amount of time, you can actually collect interest. Well, it's really hard to manage. It's hard to figure out that number. There's a weird calculations, right? So they created some technology that actually goes and gets interest payments from payers, and I 100% think we're going to start seeing that. But again, they'll figure out how to deny something else. If you've seen, there's some recent stats that say that what is the denial what is it? Oh, coverage denial. We didn't have coverage for that person. We've gotten good at finding out if that person actually has coverage, right? Those denials have actually decreased over the last 5 years significantly. But what's gone up correspondingly was medical necessity, right? And so it's this corresponding medical necessity. It's actually the amount that they're denying is actually almost exactly the same. Like, it hasn't, we've gotten good at this, but it's like, we'll find this other area.
Yeah, they have different, we don't have as much coverage cases. They come up occasionally, obviously, but the pre-auths and the coding denials we see a lot with our clients. I mean, another pre-auth was we had a husband and wife traveled out of state, out of network for their health insurer. She was pregnant, permission from her, asked her doctor if it was okay to travel. They did. She unfortunately had a complication while they were out of town. They called before they took her to the ER and said, this is what's going on, and yes, you're authorized to go to ER out of network. She did, and she had to deliver and stay in this hospital out of network for like a week till they could transfer. $600,000 in charges, they denied it all and said, well, we authorized the ER visit, we did not authorize the NICU and the maternity care.
But they
afterwards.
put it back to the patient, like the patient?
Yes, they put it back on the patient. And so, just by connection, this wasn't a provider case, we had a connection to this patient and have had to work through that. But that was a lot of stress for them, and it was probably an 8 to 12 month process of, because who has, hey, I think I have health insurance and I definitely don't have $600,000 laying around to pay charges.
How many of those, because I work in the industry, right? So I get, my brother-in-law sent a friend over. She's, and this is like, I think what's changing rapidly is like people are kind of, they're not entrepreneurs, but they're like on their own, right? And so they have coverage, and so she changed coverage just because she didn't have this job anymore. She got this job. She changed coverages. She had a pre-existing condition, whatever that means. Just by chance, she had a doctor's appointments prior to this switch, and the new company's like, we're not paying for this. It was like $25,000. She doesn't know. She's like 26 years old, you know? Right. So I'm basically like, you got to get a lawyer. You know, it's like I don't think there's any other scenario here.
That's the thing about,
feels like a crime to put it back on the patient.
Even if you do have prior authorization, quote unquote, that is absolutely not a guarantee of payment. They still have every right to come back and say, yes, we authorized it, but we didn't promise we were going to pay. Now we can look at, was it medically necessary? Was the coding correct? Did you meet all of these requirements? There's this misunderstanding out there. Yeah, I have insurance. And I was authorized.
Yeah.
Why aren't they paying for it? Because they have.
It's not a guarantee.
Because legally they have every right to go back and take a look, and that's where. But again, it's on us as providers. It's a huge administrative burden. It's incredibly stressful for patients who are in the middle of this, because they're getting letters. You're denied. You're this and that, and like even if we as the provider have taken that on and said we're going to, we're going to appeal this on your behalf. We're going to go. We're going to go to bat for you. That's still incredibly stressful on it, on the patient themselves, especially a brand new mother. That's a horrible story.
That's a horrible story. Thanks for bringing the broom down, right?
I'm all about staying positive.
And now, a word from our sponsor. This episode of My Good Friends is brought to you today by our good friends at Switch RCM. And Nate is here to tell us about physician underpayments. Tell us, Nate.
Physician billing underpayments are a real challenge for providers. Claim volumes are very high. Payments are lower than payments when compared to hospital-side payments. We created technology that can handle those large volume of claims, automatically identify underpayments to help our provider clients recover those. And we do that using standard 837, 835 claims and remittance and contracts. That's all we need to help providers unlock that underpayment revenue.
Folks, it's a huge issue. So much volume. We know that Switch is doing just amazing work here. Contact Nate directly at nate@switchrcm.com for more information. Thanks, Nate.
Thank you.
Now, back to the show.
I have a story of a win.
Let's take, hold on, let's see. Well, let's definitely take some questions from the audience. So I think Brian's got a mic. Somebody else has, we have a couple mics running around.
I'm armed and dangerous right here.
Love to take a couple questions.
Anyone? Yes. Kristen, right?
Yes. Sorry, if you knew me in real life, I am a big nerd when it comes to all this stuff. So you mentioned earlier, I forget which one of you said, on the clawbacks, they have it in our contracts. Has anybody seen a provider successfully get that removed from a contract? And, you know, I am involved in payer contracting, so I know what that process looks like, but I'm just curious.
That's a good question for the audience. Like, has anyone gotten a clawback provision removed? My guess is, if I had to take a guess, you would have to give concessions on something else, right? So the whole negotiation process, you know, it's like, well, we'll give you a rate increase of 5% on these things you don't care about, but like, it sounds nice. But you might have to give concessions on other things, is what I would guess. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, they have a lot of leverage, obviously, right? If you're a big health insurer and say, I can drive, you go in network with me, I can drive our insureds to your place. So the clawback, I've never had that issue come up in terms of a provider wanting to take it out or needing to take it out. It's almost like it's an accepted industry standard. But
Well,
I'm
I
not
think-
sure on that. I don't work a ton of
I mean,
contracting
Medicare's
side.
allowed to do it, and they sort of, right, CMS is, they kind of set the standard for those kinds of things. Like, they're allowed to do it. They have a very organized program about how they do it and how they are allowed to, so
But the way they do it, you could still
Yeah.
come back and say you're gonna do an audit.
Correct.
But just to take the money without asking.
Yes.
Medicare does that too.
Yeah, but that's the federal government. They do that all the time.
It's totally okay with the federal government.
Exactly. Other questions? I'd love
Just
to,
another day.
would love to take another question or two.
I have a question for the group. You know, Kevin, as the CEO of RevKeep, you know, technology is entering our revenue cycle industry quickly. You know, with AI, we're talking about AI coding now. I'm sure some of you have heard of that. How does technology inject itself in the years to come to help combat these situations? I mean, we're all familiar with the horror stories that we're describing here, but what's next? I mean, where is this going?
There's there's a lot of talks about AI and machine learning. I don't know the difference, quite frankly. But, you know, there's an old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So, like, you could have this great, amazing technology, and at the end of the day, true stories, the provider says, can you just help me get these files? I got a letter with 200 names on it, each one for the same sciatica surgery. Each one was $20,000, okay? That's $4 million. It's going to take me longer than 6 months to pull all these records from Epic. Can you get these records, organize them for us so that we can work on them? So, you know, there's no AI there, right? It's just you have fewer people. And so, to me, and I'm practical about this, it's using technology. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. You use technology to fix things. I mean, that's really what, right? To organize. So get off of Excel spreadsheets. Because if Kevin goes on vacation, Kevin never goes on vacation, by the way. But if Kevin were to go on vacation and he had some files, these things all have time delay, time limits. And I'm on Bali or in Bali. I don't know. I don't even know about Bali, but it's fun to say. So I'm there, and I didn't respond. We actually had a hospital where the person was on vacation. They lost $3 million in RAC audits because she was on vacation for a month, and they didn't respond. And if you do not respond or you respond late, you lose it. You're done.
Well,
You lose 100% of what you don't respond to.
I'll answer it, I think, in a different way. I would say that AI and large language models, document understanding, all these are tools in the tool belt that you better be thinking about how to use, because they are absolutely doing it. They are absolutely going down that road. And I heard a presentation from, I won't say which payer, but a payer that got up very brazenly and absolutely told us, like, I saved $20 million using one bot. And if you listen to my podcast, I've talked about this. And I leaned to the person next to me and I go, if he says denials, I swear, it's like I'm gonna lose my mind. And that's exactly what he meant.
He didn't save 20 million. He stole 20 million more.
And he went further. The next slide actually had that they're going to invest 3 times the amount that they invested that year. It was like a trial. Let's just see if this works. And the reality is, like, they are doing that everywhere. And you're not cutting costs. I said in the beginning a little bit, but it's like, you guys, like, so I work with providers, right, or members at my company that are like a community of providers trying to build automations in AI, right? So we learn from each other. Almost everyone uses, the standard we use for ROI is, did you take cost out? And I think that's fine. Like, I understand why we're doing it that way. They are not thinking that. This guy got up and said, I'm not taking cost out, but my nurses are 10x more efficient. And what that means is, if they were doing $100,000 and above reviews, they're now doing $50,000 and above reviews. So, and it makes sense, right? If you guys are in the room and you're seeing your clinical denials and medical necessity denials go up, there's a reason for that. Because they are getting good at it. Because what they're using is like large language models and AI to actually consolidate, synthesize the record and say, like, this is the issues. Like, that is what's happening. And we're going to have to do the same thing on our side. I recently saw a CFO survey. I just go on a little tangent here. And and sorry if you're a CFO in the room, but the CFO survey was like, what's your biggest issue with, like, denials and payers? And the number 1 and 2 things were like, well, I don't have enough people, and I don't have, and the number 1 issue was like, my people don't have enough, I don't have the right talent or something to that degree. And I was like, your people haven't changed. The game hasn't changed. The sheer volume of stuff has changed. And so, yes, Brian, I think, like, we are behind on this. Not everybody, but as a collective, like, we're behind on it. Because we spent 10 years implementing Epic or whatever EMR you used. And Epic's great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just like we took a lot of time to go do that. And we're coming out of that phase, most of us, and it's like, yeah, but they didn't go through that. They're using the same old systems they were doing 10 years ago.
Yeah, the technology side, even from our perspective, from a legal side, we have pivoted because the manpower issue or the talent issue, it's not that we have to litigate every claim, but when we make it easier, let us do the work up front for you because you have manpower issues. If you can give us access, so technology to be able to get access right away so they're not having to pull it and look at it and constantly. And to be honest with you, in just our space, being able to trade on your name when you start sending letters from a hospital as opposed to just a law firm or an RCM company that will actually do something about it beyond the letter, that gains traction with payors.
Because you've been doing it 25 years.
Yeah,
right?
our
In the healthcare space.
So.
You told a story
And you're ruthless.
last night.
You're ruthless.
Talking about dinner. Ryan actually met a couple of payers, and they said, "Oh, we hate you. We get a letter from you. We just cut a check." And it's like everybody should be. Yes, that's like, negotiate with a feather. No, I'd negotiate with a baseball bat because that's what they're doing.
And it shouldn't have to come to that, but it is.
It does. And so going back, technology, because we understand efficiency and manpower. We don't want to be a ginormous expense. We want to help you get revenue back and stop certain denials. So we've had to respond to this increase in technology from the payers and what they're doing. Because when it comes down to it from a legal perspective, if you go all the way to the end of it, they either don't want to tell you the basis of the programs they're running, or they have outsourced the coding, and the company they've outsourced to, it's proprietary and will not,
it's a black box.
Absolutely will not tell you anything. And so at the end of the day, if you went to court as far as that, it gets off the table. If you can't tell us the basis of it, how it started, who you're comparing your region to and whatnot, it's no good. So, but going back to what Ben said, you have to get to that point. And so you have to eventually draw your line in the sand and say, I can aggregate my $3,000, 150,000 of these denials into one payer, and we're going to put a stop to it.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, man.